So good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night Anam Cara Meditation program. And with all my heart and with all my love, I welcome you to our program this evening. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for bringing the power of your presence, the power of your practices to our program tonight. And, we're going to be going into some of the practices and talking about dharma, the overall understanding of practice and how we live all the different practices into the world and how that affects our state. And before we get into that, we're going to be doing the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are a really potent way of being able to help both quiet the mind and shift our attention, shift our consciousness from being so gripped by identification with all the thoughts and all the content of the mind. So mantra in general enables us to do that, to really separate our consciousness from its habitual place of really getting locked into identification with everything that's arising, really that's in that sky of awareness. So when we do the opening mantras, it's a way of being able to shift our consciousness, but it's also a way of invoking that highest consciousness. Because the root power of mantra is Kundalini Shakti. This is the boundless power of consciousness that both transcends and embraces all that is and brings our consciousness into that. So we'll be doing these opening mantras, and anybody can download these mantras from the Anam Cara website. So there's a document there with the opening mantras, with the chants that we typically do. And anytime you can download those and have them for yourself. And so whether you're chanting along, and that's the best thing to do with mantra, is to be able to really chant that, or listen. If you're not familiar with it and you just want to listen, allow yourself to kind of be bathed in that power, that vibration, that throb of the infinite that is the mantra. And in that way, it's helping us to kind of shift our attention away from all the pathways that it usually goes to in the mind. So we'll begin with these opening mantras, and then we're just going to sit in the stillness after that for a few moments. Because that's the real gift of mantra, is opening that spaciousness of being, that spaciousness of awareness, that's free of identification with the content of mind. Even if the mind is there, we can be detached, aware, separate, and aware of the infinitude of that boundless consciousness, even while we see the little threads of thoughts and things that go through the mind. So we'll start with the opening mantras. Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai Jananam Bhutta Ganari Sevitam Kapita Jambu Palacharu Bhakshanam Umasutam Shokam Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Mata Kali Devi Ki Jai. So once again, I welcome you with all my heart and all my love to our program this evening. So good of you to be able to join us, and we're going to be talking about Dharma because this is the first Thursday of the month, and so this is when we usually get into kind of a Dharma talk. And last month we were talking about shadow and sort of the dark side of what our mind is and how we get caught in that, and really how the practices help to relieve that. And so we were talking about, especially in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the writings that Patanjali codified 2,000 or more years ago, on the yamas and the niyamas, the restraints and observances that help to cut through the kind of contracted ways that the mind can get caught in, and then creates more and more karma that's going to take more and more lifetimes to live through, learn from, change, and et cetera, et cetera. So in the yogic tradition, they're both looking at getting free in an absolute sense, but also getting free of the various patterns, the samskaras. These are patterns that get carried over even from lifetime after lifetime that bind us. But the root, the understanding of what's the root of all of that, both in the yogic tradition and in the Buddhist tradition, is what's called avidya. And avidya means this kind of primal ignorance. It's the unknowing of who we truly are. It's being ignorant of our sublime, all-embracing divine self. And that everything else that happens can be traced back to that root, that ignorance. Because it's seen out of that ignorance comes the mind itself. The mind is a bound, limited form that doesn't think of itself as the infinite, doesn't think of itself as in one with all. And in that limited sense of me, that limited sense of I, then we have things that we lack, things that we want, things that we have that we'd like to get rid of. And so all those kinds of desires, all those kinds of patterns of thinking and craving and seeking further bind the mind and further create karma, because now we're acting on those, and then we have to, over lifetimes, experience the consequences of our actions. And so when it was Buddha or the great yogis were looking at a way to cut through that, they realized that on a very profound level, we have to cut through that root. We have to get free of that primal ignorance. And so the path of yoga and the path of meditation is really aimed at freeing us on all levels. But even as we look at what goes on and with the mind and see some of those ways that it binds us unconsciously, and that we often refer to as shadow, we can see that in a sense you can also notice that there are things that are part of a collective shadow. Groups, even nations, political parties have those kind of hidden aspects, those kinds of unconscious aspects, then also drive actions, drive behaviors, drive the mind, drive what it finds attractive and wants to go after, what it finds aversive and wants to get rid of. And the practices of meditation, of becoming immersed in the self, of going into the stillness where all those patterns dissolve, are aimed at getting us free of that. And especially in the yogic tradition, it's often talked about more explicitly, though it was a very esoteric part of yoga, was this power of consciousness to both transform and reveal and set us free from the mind. So that power in the yogic tradition is known as Kundalini Shakti. Shakti is power, the power of universal consciousness. Kundalini is the name of the form of that is inherent to each and every one of us. So that we all have that capacity, and many of the practices are aimed at cultivating that, and ultimately then looking at what happens when this power begins to stir and awaken. And some of the spontaneous transformations, the spontaneous process of even bringing things about the shadow to light come up through Kundalini. And so that light of awareness of Kundalini is very different than the ordinary mind's sort of way of focusing attention and awareness on something. I mean, usually when the mind attends to something, well, it brings with it all its, inherent attitudes. I don't like this, that's annoying, this is great, oh, I want more of that. And so it fluctuates with all these different feelings. And so some things it wants to avoid, including things about itself. That's why certain aspects of our unconscious that we were talking about last month have to do with things that we can't see for ourselves, and that we depend on the Sangha, we depend on a teacher, we depend on others to help inform us so that we get to see those patterns and get free of them, transform them. But the light of consciousness that is this Kundalini Shakti, it's also known as the light of grace. It's the power of Holy Spirit. It illuminates, but it illuminates with this loving, compassionate, self-luminous quality. So it doesn't frighten the mind. It doesn't say, oh, look at you, you're awful, you should have done this. No, it sees it and sees that it's bound and invites it into freedom, into how to let go of that pattern. Part of which means disidentifying with it. A lot of what catches us about the ordinary mind, the shadow, is really that we're identified with it. And identification is part of how the mind operates, and really it's part of how it takes hold of things. We were talking last month about how the power of self-appropriation, how the ego mind in the yogic tradition is looked at as this power of self-appropriation. It appropriates to itself things, takes possession of them, owns them. And part of the way it does that is by identifying with them. It tries to hold a quality and identify with that. It tries to hold an idea, identify with that, and take possession of it. And that taking possession through identification is also what binds the mind. So Shakti, Kundalini, pure consciousness, this open spaciousness of awareness, isn't bound and limited, identified with any of the particulars. It illuminates them all. And so it can invite consciousness, because remember, the consciousness of mind is also something the mind has self-appropriated. The mind is really content, a string of thoughts about ourselves, the narrative we tell ourselves about who and what we are. Now, all these things are then detached from, witnessed, looked at within the context of this spaciousness of awareness that illuminates it all. And that's what furthers that process of being able to get free of the shadow, whether it's on a collective level, and that we're affected by that, or our personal shadow, things that we've brought in either from past lives or experiences that we've had that have bound us in this life. And that can be especially true of traumatic experiences. We know that they seem to be especially sticky for the mind in terms of they really catch us because of the emotional energy behind that. So being able to step back, but stepping back into this loving, embracing awareness that invites us to be free so that we can know the fullness of our being without having to defend, without having to push away, to be present in all our fullness. That's what the practices really aim at, and how they approach being able to dissolve shadow. And when that light of awareness begins to illuminate these different things that bind us, our different, how we might be identified with a role that we play or a relationship that we're in, we begin to see, the way the mind attaches itself. It thinks, oh, I am this. I am a man. I am a woman. I'm a professional. I'm a failure. I'm happy. I'm sad. I am. And then everything that comes after that the mind tells itself, becomes this container that binds it. And so that's why, for instance, in non-dualistic Advaita Vedanta, just the self-inquiry process of asking, who have I become now? Who am I now? What am I identified with now? And then kind of universally, it's answered with neti neti. Not this, not this, not this. Let go of that. You're not that either. Not that, not that, not that. So that all those little limiting, binding notions of the mind we can get free of. Right? So we can just watch them float through the open sky of awareness without jumping in and saying, yeah, that's me. Oh, look at that's me. That's me. Yeah, that's me. That's mine. That's I, me, mine, mine. And getting free of that is at the heart of what sadhana practices is about. So part of it can be approached in that way of the detaching and really stepping back in that neti, not this, not this. But it's also seen that we can cultivate sort of the other side of the awareness, the fullness of awareness. And that is often sort of summarized as itty, and this, and this, and this. See, it's really, in a sense, to come to know our true nature, we have to either wipe the slate clean and get free of all the limiting things that we identify with, or say, no, it's all consciousness, it's all the self, it's all the divine, it's all me. And both paths meet in that unity awareness. Both come to that awareness of I am that. I am all that is. That's the Hamsa mantra. I am that. It's Shivoham, Shivoham. It means I am the auspicious one. I am the auspicious one. So also cultivating that as an awareness helps to free us of all the things that bind the mind. So when thoughts are coming up, and even when we're doing practices, the use of mantra, for instance, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, this throb of the infinite that is your very self. And we do it with the awareness of I am that, or Shivoham, I am the auspicious one. Then as ordinary thoughts are coming up and going by, they're no more than, just little fireflies in the night sky. Because you're starting to shift attention and awareness and identification into the boundlessness of being, the boundlessness of who you are, the boundlessness of Buddha mind. Last week when we were doing the Heart Sutra and looking at it, and you see how Buddha was talking about, he was in that state of deep prajna paramita, the deep wisdom of knowing, and seeing all the ephemeral things of the mind and the senses and objects of perception. They're not who you are. They're not the true nature of what you are. So the practices invite us into that, and then more and more get us free of the shadow and everything else. But we also have to be aware that there's things that we have to do to cultivate change in that, because there's also a phenomenon called spiritual bypass, where you sort of want to go into that transcendent state and not actually look at, how is this vehicle bound? How is this mind bound? And that it needs to be freed, so that then when the fullness of your being comes more clearly through this instrument, the instrument is attuned to be able to really unfold that in its fullness, manifest that in its fullness, express that in its fullness, so that boundless love, boundless compassion, boundless patience can come through. If that's, and it is, that's your true nature, and then it hits the mind, and the mind's going, no, I'm like this, and I'm like this, and I don't like that, and I want this, then that energy just gets jammed. So it's got to be that these instruments are also getting transformed. And that's why we also pay attention to where are we contracted, where are we bound. This is what Carl Jung was referring to, that I quoted in the last time we were talking about shadow, when he said, you don't create enlightenment by imaging figures of light You do it by bringing the light of awareness into the darkness of the unconscious. We bring the light of awareness. That's that beautiful, loving, embracing consciousness into the darkness, the recesses of our mind, those things that we don't want to look at, because our identification with them can also give rise to shame, give rise to uncomfortable feelings, or anger, or annoyance, or hurt, or pain. But when we can step back and illuminate it with this loving, kind, boundless awareness, it says it's okay. We're going to free up all the energy that was caught up in those experiences, in those patterns of viewing yourself and others. All that can get free. All of that can then participate in really being able to create the reality that reflects the truth of who you are, the fullness of your being. So in Kashmir Shaivism is an interesting sort of tenet that says, the world is as you see it. The world is as you see it. And what they're pointing to is, for the most part, how we see the world is a projection. It's a projection of whatever state that we're in that moment. And if we're in a miserable state, the world looks miserable. In a happy state, the world looks different. Ultimately, those states of mind are all contracting, all limiting, all binding. And so the practices, mantra, the awakening of Kundalini, this power of revelation and transformation, is aimed at freeing all of that, so that we get free of creating a reality that's just based on the projections of our mind. You know, in Western psychology, we've paid a lot of attention to that. So that's why we see that, people project things from their childhood. They project, mom onto women. They project dad onto men. They project this and that. We go through life with all these projections. And very often, we can become aware of that and how it's related to shadow by some of those really spontaneous, immediate reactions we have to people we don't even know. They're ambiguous. You don't know them. And in that ambiguity, the mind is much more ready to project what it's holding on to. And so we can sort of see somebody and just have a sort of immediate distaste for them, or an immediate like for them. Because projection, and projection of shadow, projection of disowned, lost parts of ourself, can be positive and negative. We just go through life unconsciously projecting these things. Bobby used to say about projection, he says, when a pickpocket looks at a saint, all he sees are his pockets. Projection. What we want and need, what we're identified with, what we want and need from the world, we project, we see through that lens. So even if we're in the company of somebody sublime, we might only see their pockets. So being able to kind of repossess the energy of that projection and the shadow begins to make us more and more conscious and more free, so that we can see those patterns and see them arise before we get caught in them. And really this kind of boundless, loving consciousness that is the root of who and what we are is what empowers us to do that in a way that doesn't kind of re-traumatize the mind. The mind, in part of its avoidance of looking at the dark recesses of our unconscious, is because it brings that compulsive habit of identifying with content. And so if there's negative content there, it doesn't want to see it. So the practices address that in a couple of different ways. One is we start to really be able to experience the loving, luminous quality of the divine within ourselves. That does bring things to mind, brings things up. One of the things that happens both in meditation, but other times as well, and it's one of the hallmarks of how Shakti, how this power of consciousness works, is it stirs things up from the depths that we couldn't get at ordinarily. But part of it is that in order to do that, we need to cultivate the experience of that being that witness, detached and aware, just watching the unfolding of what's arising in consciousness as the play of Shakti, the play of consciousness itself. Because one of the things that the yogic tradition understands is all of these bound forms, all of them, including that root avidya, that root ignorance, they are all the creation of the divine. We didn't impose that on ourselves. They're created by the divine. So that's why it takes an act of grace, an influx of the power of consciousness of the infinite to finally sever that root of avidya. Because it's Kundalini Shakti herself who created that. She is the one that cuts through it, sets our awareness free once again. To then see the whole play. Because she sees it from a very, very different vantage point. Our consciousness as the infinite one, all it sees is itself. Shakti, all she sees is herself, taking on this form, pretending to be bound, pretending to get liberated, pretending this, pretending that. In that sense, this creative play of hers just goes on and is the unfolding of her delight. It's incomprehensible to the ordinary mind. This is a delight? Seems like an awful lot of suffering. It's because we can't see until we're in that state and then can see what's really going on. And that's how the power of grace, the power of the unfolding of Shakti, of awakened Kundalini, is able to transform our consciousness in ways that just practices done by the mind can never get at. The mind is not empowered in that way. The mind is like the wave on the ocean. The wave is part of the ocean, but the whole ocean isn't in the wave. The whole is your whole boundless consciousness. And it arises and subsides in this thought, this feeling, this identity, this life, that life, on and on. And the practices that we do, the chanting, the mantras, the meditation, the contemplation, are all aimed at bringing us back home to that living presence of awareness that's already fully here, fully developed. And what's in the way? That compulsive identification with content of mind. And so we also have to see that in part, that's suffering. Suffering comes from identifications with limitations. So one of the things that yogis and meditators begin to notice is pain isn't just something about, oh, I've got to make things change and things I have to get rid of this or I got to get rid of that or I need something to assuage the pain. Pain also becomes a message about what are you identified with in the moment that's creating that pain or exacerbating that pain. Because it's the disidentification that begins to set us free. And that's even true with pain that, for instance, is physical pain in the body. We know that if our awareness becomes hyper-focused on the physical pain, and it begins to dominate our consciousness, it makes that experience of pain worse. So even in pain management, which I've done with individuals, we teach people to detach, step back. Notice where the pain is. Notice the quality, the texture. You can notice things about it. But now you're also, by doing that, you're starting to add the background awareness that's bigger than any pain, bigger than any identification with pain, bigger than any sense of I am the pain. Now it's more and more, oh, pain is arising. I can see that in the field of consciousness and awareness. Pain is arising. You can be present with that very lovingly, very compassionately. So all these ways are kind of a part of the practices and how they help set us free. And, one of the things that's also connected with with shadow, because many ways that we're talking about are aspects of the conditioned mind, that these are patterns that have been conditioned both in this lifetime and past lifetimes. But one of those components is our whole sense of individualism. That sense of I, well, it can be looked at in different ways. But often it dominates by being, in a sense, impressed with itself. I did this, I do that. Even its initial approach to doing sadhana practice. I'm going to meditate, I do this, I do that. It's very much engaged in what it is doing. I'm doing. I'm going to do these practices, I'm going to get better and better. And behind it can be, a sublime motivation, but the way the ego mind goes about it is actually creating bondage. And it does it because it starts to create a kind of arrogance about it. In fact, there's a saying from the old desert fathers in the agnostic tradition that they said, if you see a person climbing to heaven on their own, pull them down so that they won't fall from a greater height. Because if you think you're just doing it on your own, that pride is going to come before the fall. So the humility that comes with understanding our interdependence with everything, that we become aware that we have no independent existence in terms of body and mind. This is one of the traps people fall into about, I accomplished this and I accomplished that. I got this, I amassed this great fortune, I did it, I deserve all the credit. That's diluted from a yogic understanding of how everything is interdependent. So being able to contemplate that as a practice, whether it's before a meal, we take a moment of stillness and remember all that went into just that food that we have. Everything from the elements that grew the food and the earth, to the people who harvested it and worked out in the sun, to the truckers who shipped it to markets, to the people who handled it there, on and on. I mean, you just follow one thread and you get the whole cloth of society. There's no independence. We're interdependent. And to appreciate that, then we can then much better appreciate all the contributions that all beings are making to where we are in this moment. But that contemplation is a practice. And part of what that contemplation does, and it's also kind of a swadhyaya, what we talked about last time as self-study, is understanding that interdependence and enhancing our deep appreciation for that unity that even the mind begins to get a hold of. And then as the power of the practices begin to also open the direct experience of what it is to be united with everyone, everything, that the Creator, all of creation, all creatures, these are one. It's all there is. That the practices are bringing us to that awareness. And that's really the gift of what we call in yoga Kundalini Shakti, or Holy Spirit, or grace, because that's not something the mind can create. That's not something the mind can open up. It takes the grace, the same grace that created the bondage, the illusion of separation, is the one that finally dissolves it. And then in both meditative, silent, still states, but more and more, that state of what's often called samadhi begins to be accessible all times, all places. The highest samadhi, sahaja samadhi, it's called the living samadhi because it's unbroken. Samadhi is unbroken. We may access it intermittently, but the state is unbroken. So the more we become drenched in that awareness, the more it begins to just fill our consciousness at all times, in all places. Even if we are seeing, this particular body doing what it needs to do to fulfill its dharma, or ourself as another fulfilling our dharma in that form. It's all a self. You're all a self. That's all there is. To know that, to revel in that, then it shifts our entire way of relating. Then we're seeing through God's eyes that this is all a creation. This is all that. So how could I ever treat it with anything but love? We want that vision that comes from our true self, that comes from our highest source. And so when we start to see that, now we're entering the domain of the mystics and what they write about in all the different traditions and different flavors you get as you read that. This is a poem from the great poet Saint Kabir. And Kabir writes, "With a begging bowl in hand, a man with amnesia knocks at his own door. My guru cured me of that profound illness. God, asking God for forgiveness and alms?" That's the illness. Seeing separation and difference where there isn't any. You are the divine. You are the infinite. That is who you are. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, "God sees nothing in us that he has not given. Everything is empty until he places what he wishes into it. The soul is like an uninhabited world that comes to life only when God lays his head against us. You know the delight a child can know tossing a ball into the air? My Lord confessed he experiences this whenever he looks at you. God sees nothing in us that he has not given. Nothing. Not shadow, not light. All comes from the divine. All has that one source. This frees us from blame too, right? If we're going to blame something for the creation, you have to blame the Creator. Letting go and letting go and letting go. To come to that profound awareness, the root of our being. St. Thomas Aquinas also wrote, "Because of my compassion, the sun wanted to be near me all night, and the earth deeded her fields to me, and all in heaven said, 'We voted you our governor. Tell us your divine mandate.' And I did, and God will never revoke it. Nothing in existence is turned away. More tender is my Lord's heart than any heart has ever been. So when the divine realm asked me to govern it with one simple rule, I looked into his eyes and then knew what to say to any angel who might serve as a sentry to God. No creature should be turned away. They're all in God's embrace. Are all aspects of the divine. How could God turn against himself? How can you turn against yourself? You are that one. The great poet saint Hafiz, a Sufi saint, wrote, "I have come into this world to see this, The sword dropped from men's hands, even at the height of their arc of anger. Because we have finally realized there is just one flesh to wound, and it is His. It is His, the divine, Christ, our beloved. I have come into this world to see this. All creatures hold hands. As we pass through this miraculous existence, we share on the way to even a greater being of soul, a being of just ecstatic light, forever entwined and at play with Him. I have come into the world to hear this, every song the earth has sung, since it was conceived in the divine's womb and began spinning from His wish. Every song by wing and fin and hoof, every song by hill and field and tree and woman and child, every song of stream and rock, every song of tool and lyre and flute, every song of gold and emerald and fire, every song the heart should cry with magnificent dignity to know itself as God. For all other knowledge will leave us again in want, in aching. Only imbibing the glorious sun of the infinite, the divine, will complete us. I have come into the world to experience this. Men so true to love, they would rather die before speaking an unkind word. Men so true, their lives are His covenant, the promise of hope. I have come into this world to see this. The sword drop from men's hands, even at the height of their arc of rage, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh we can wound. That one. It's who you are. That one. That's the divine. It's the infinite. That one dissolves all bondage to shadow and mind, limited identifications of all kinds. But we keep turning our attention to the one. Keep turning your attention to the one everywhere. Even if you're looking out and around, remind the mind, it's all the one. It's all God. It's all God sees as Himself. How can you see anything differently? You have a power God doesn't? No. The illusion of separation is God's power of unknowing. God has to unknow His unity to experience limitation and diversity. Coming home to the self is God's gift of grace, removing that veil, that illusion. That's what Shakti does. That's Kundalini's grace. Opening the doors of our heart, our awareness, to know the infinite as our own self. And the great sage Shankaracharya, the sage of Advaita Vedanta from the 8th century, he wrote the 6 stanzas on salvation, on nirvana. And this too is a proclamation of it. This cuts through all those different levels of shadow, individual and collective, by proclaiming, much in the same way that the Heart Sutra does from Buddha's vision. This is Shankaracharya, this great enlightened Siddha, sharing his vision. I am neither the conscious nor the unconscious mind, neither intelligence nor ego, neither the ears nor the tongue nor the senses of smell and sight, neither ether nor air nor fire nor water, not earth, For Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am the form of consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. I am neither the prana nor the 5 vital airs, neither speech nor hands, nor feet, nor anus, nor sex organ. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva, the auspicious one. Neither aversion nor attachment, neither avarice nor delusion, neither righteousness nor wealth nor pleasure are mine. For Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am boundless consciousness, boundless bliss, ecstasy, rapture. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. I am neither virtue nor vice, neither pleasure nor pain, neither mantra nor sacred place, neither Vedas nor sacrifices. I am neither the food nor the eater nor the act of eating. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am boundless consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. Neither death nor doubt nor caste identification, neither father nor mother, not even birth are mine at all. I am neither brother nor friend, neither guru nor disciple indeed. For Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. You want to proclaim that. That resounds in your awareness. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. I am without thought, I am without form, I am all pervasive, I am everywhere, yet I am beyond all the senses. I am neither detachment nor salvation, nor anything that could be measured. But Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva. I am Shiva. Coming home to that awareness, that's what Dharma is. That's what the practices bring us to. The living awareness of knowing that at all times, all places, no matter what we see, is the unfolding of that consciousness. The consciousness that is the bliss of consciousness, the bliss of creation, taking forms, dissolving forms. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Going beyond the mind, coming to rest in that. That's what we do the practices for. So now we're going to be chanting the Maha Mantra, the great mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. It means I bow to the auspicious one, I bow to Shiva. And we repeat that mantra both as we chant it and then sit in silence repeating it with that awareness of Shivoham, Shivoham. I am the boundless one. I'm the boundless one watching. Sensations arise in this thing called the body. Thoughts arising in this thing called the mind. But I am all of that, for I am Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. I am all that is Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. So we'll chant the mantra Om Namah Shivaya for a few minutes and then just sit in the stillness of our own Shiva consciousness that embraces all, holds all, with that rapturous, loving, ecstatic awareness. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Shri Mata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai. Shiva sitting in the stillness, the bare awareness. I am that. I am the boundless one. Inviting the mind to take refuge in Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. I am Shiva. I am the auspicious one. I am the divine within all. Come to rest there. So we end with this prayer, and may all our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. So this world is this play of light and shadow, just contracted forms of pure consciousness. And what we're invited to be able to do is see through that play and not get caught, not be identified with just the little pieces, just a part of it. That's where the pain and suffering comes in. That's where the delusion comes in. That's what then drives the mind and the body into so many domains of seeking and wanting and needing that it can be free of, so that it can see the infinitude of our own being and of all others. Of all others. Because we're seeing people, when we see them ordinarily, we have to be able to see that this is consciousness identified with that form. Consciousness identified with that individual. The consciousness is universal. What creates all of it and becomes all of it is universal. So when we hold that awareness, then we can see through. We can see through our own shadow, see it, see through it, see past it, understand what's the truth of who you are. Because even the shadow is the unfolding of the divine. Even the shadow is the creation of the infinite. It's the infinite taking on limited forms. Our false self, our limited self, our shadow, all the play of the divine. But to truly know that, we have to dissolve in that stillness. Because that stillness is illumined by boundless consciousness. That boundless consciousness that is all-embracing, loving, compassionate awareness, leaves nothing out, embraces it all as your own self. Then that informs our mind. Then we can walk that into the world in our everyday life, in our relationships, and our work. Because we're seeing the truth. And it also gives us greater and greater compassion for others who are caught in not seeing that, caught and bound and flailing about, and in so doing creating suffering for themselves and others. We can be free. We can invite others to be free. But first get free yourself. Come home to the truth of who you are and walk that into the world. So once again, I want to thank you all for coming this evening and bringing the power of your practices, the power of your awareness that you live into the world and in your life and in the context in which you live, that keeps this flame of truth, this light of the infinite alive in all these different places. So what you're doing in every way like that is so important and so needed in the world. So thank you for your commitment, thank you for your practice, thank you for coming home to yourself and living that into the world. And Next week, we will be back again. And then it's going to be the second Thursday of the month. And you can look up on the Anam Cara website that sequence of programs that we go through if you want to know. But until then, again, thank you all for coming with all my heart and with all my love. Thank you for being here.